NewsNation breaking news coverage of Israel's massive surprise attack on Iran's nuclear facilities and the coming Iranian response. Live pictures of Tel Aviv, where, as you can see, it is now 6 a.m. and Tel Aviv will be one of the world's quietest cities, as much of the Israeli population, including 700,000 Americans, are going to be in their bomb shelters. The Iranians have promised attacks not only on Israel, but on American bases, 50,000 American service members throughout the Middle East. Overnight, Israel launched a massive surprise attack on Iran's nuclear program. They said Iran was within days of developing a nuclear bomb, and with that, proceeded to take out much of Iran's military command structure, including the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Israel then took out a number of Iran's top nuclear scientists and began bombings onto Iran's nuclear facilities, including Natanz, the main place for uranium enrichment, and then also one of their heavy water reactors. This was the moment of inflection people have been waiting for in the Middle East for about 20 years, and now it has happened. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, saying they are at war, and this will be a multi-day campaign against Iran. They start by taking out Iran's air defenses, their command and control, in what was a surprise attack. And now we're following up with waves and waves of bombing, both by fighter jets. The Israelis don't have long-range bombers, and then also with drones. The Israelis are also prepared for this massive Iranian counterattack. The Iranians have thousands of ballistic missiles, although they have not launched any of them right now. Incredible panel with us as well. Joel Rubin, formerly with the State Department under the Obama administration. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen with us. Jim Hansen is with us. Also remotely, Lieutenant General Richard Newton of the United States Air Force, retired, and Glenn Ignazio, former Air Force Special Operations Commander. Glenn, I'm going to start this in reverse with where this all began, which is the unbelievable intelligence operation by the Israelis of penetrating into Iran and knowing where the Iranian generals were sleeping, literally, to take them out. And I think that probably plays into a lack of response by the Iranians, that so much of their command and control has been destroyed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we look at it, even in the prior months that they were taking individuals out within Iran itself, the Mossad and all of the organizations that Israel has is one of the best. We keep on repeating that. But to be able to identify both where the individuals are, because they take out the individuals, it impacts them today and for tomorrow, but also all the command and control sectors, the radar, power plants, anything that's going to take those systems down. Having that understanding, that presence on the ground, and be able to highlight those and have the Israeli defense or the Air Force take them out is pristine. And that's something that is completely dominated by the IDF and has absolutely put Iran back on their heels. And it will continue with that type of intelligence from the ground. That is absolutely priceless.
Senator Mullen's nodding along. I think there's a lot of Americans tonight who are watching and thinking about not only 700,000 Americans in Israel, of whom a number of Joel Rubin's relatives, but also 50,000 American troops. You put out a tweet earlier saying that this is not our war, that the United States was not involved, but that we would respond if Americans are targeted.
Absolutely, 100% without question. And we have to understand, too, we have a lot of Americans that are there that don't live, but they're there it's summer. And a lot of Americans go to Israel right now for vacation. If the airspace is closed, we've got to figure out how we're going to get these individuals out. And I can assure you that Marco Rubio and the embassy there they've got to start having plans. Fortunately, when the war in Gaza started, we did have some type of plans put in. We can simply activate those again because we don't always have to take them out by air. We can take them out by sea too. But this has to change. And during that evacuation, I promise you, we'll be on standby. And if we feel threatened at all, we will be proactive, not reactive.
You know, it's amazing you say that. It takes me back to when I lived in Israel. And this goes back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that the American embassy in Tel Aviv used to exist right on the coast. It had a sea view. The thought was it was because if there ever needed to be an evacuation, you could bring Marine landing craft right up to the U.S. Embassy. That's how dangerous and volatile and vulnerable Israel was thought to be. Obviously, a lot has changed since the 1950s and 60s, when the threat of Israel being overrun was real and existed. Lieutenant General Newton, to you, the Israelis say this is going to be a sustained bombing campaign. What is the next set of targets? We go through the radars, command and control, high-value nuclear targets. What continues on in the coming days?
I think what continues on, Leland, is we'll continue to go back and make sure, based on reports from the battlefield, from we've got our intelligence, to make sure we've taken out those air defense capabilities thoroughly, as well as command and control. But I think next on the docket is going to be their ballistic missile capabilities. Not only the ballistic missile operational capabilities in the field, but to go after their ballistic missile development capabilities as well. And of course, I anticipate them to go back to the nuclear weapon sites, not only in Natanz, but elsewhere, to really thoroughly, shut down Iran, not only from its nuclear weapons capabilities. We've been talking about this all night, but really the means to deliver those nuclear weapons, those ballistic missiles, and perhaps their drone production as well, I think is really now top of their list.
Jim, you study Iran and the Iranian command and control structure. How significant is it from their military standpoint that the Israelis were so deeply penetrated into Iran's military? And I just think about now, as they're trying to convene their war council, there's got to be members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and of their top brass looking at each other and saying, who sold us out to the Israelis?
Yeah. Who's got a beeper? Who's handing it to somebody else, right? It's Operation Grim Beeper.
No one's answering a phone or doing with an alarm clock.
And where's the supreme leader?
Yeah.
You know they went after him. Did they get him? That'd be nice. That'd be a bonus. All of those people are completely on their heels, and the Israelis
and on the run,
completely baffled. Yeah, and they're hiding. Now, I think the next step, we're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. I think the question becomes, what is the next escalation point? Are they going to go and shut down the ports? Are they going to go and try and isolate Iran? Or are they going to say, we took out your nuke sites and wait a minute and see what happens in the Iranian civil society? What are the
potential of another Iranian revolution?
What color would this one be? I don't care. But any color would be better than the Islamic Republic and the Ayatollahs. Maybe this is a time, and, God willing, creek don't rise. I would be fine with that.
And keep in mind, the nuclear sites are not in one area. They have them spread out between five
buried
separate cities.
And hidden and everything else.
Yeah, well, they do, but we also know of 5 different areas. I mean, they have the uranium enrichment plant. They have the deep underground enrichment. They have the heavy water reactor. They have the conversion facility, and they have the weapons facilities. They're all in separate towns across Iran. And so there's plenty of targets that they have to go after, and you're not going to do that in 1, 2, or 3 ways.
Joel, the Israelis said now, unofficially, but I think over the coming days we will get some official statements, that the reason they did this is that the Iranians were within days of being able to build a nuclear weapon. They had intelligence that the Iranians were much farther along than President Trump and others sort of had let on, that information was shared with the Americans. To what level there was coordination? Was there advanced knowledge? Was there an approval? We don't know. But I think Mick Mulvaney asked a really important question. Do the Israelis put boots on the ground? Not just a couple of Mossad assets, but actual Israeli boots on the ground to start destroying these sites internally?
Well, Leland, first of all, this was the window of opportunity from an Israeli perspective. There was no better
the window was
than now, and it was closing, and they were looking at that, and perhaps Iran could rebuild its defensive posture to protect its sites, and they saw that still not happening. But to get on the ground, I was just reading what the Israeli Chief of General Staff just said. He is trying to lay out to the Israeli people right now that there will be casualties, that we will be seeing difficult days ahead. So I bet you can envision a situation where, yes, there would be troops on the ground sent by Israel into Iran. It could be very dangerous. It would be to potentially hit some of the areas where, if they're coming, if the missile capacity continues and they can't get it by air, you could see that. But Israel is also war-weary, and this is very important to talk about. They've spent 18-plus months now in a very difficult war in Gaza. The public is uncomfortable with how much
war with
reserve
Gaza,
duty, and then,
war
of
with
course,
Hezbollah,
but the reserve call-ups,
Yeah,
they've been extensive. And so I wonder how much rope military has in Israel. I wonder how much the
How
Israeli
long it can
public
go on for?
will allow.
There's a different definition of boots on the ground, I guess, in this point. I don't see there's any scenario where Israelis could actually deploy troops, actual troops, where an invasion would kind of see into Iran. If you're talking about a covert operation,
Covert special operations.
yes, they already have people there for
Right.
that, because otherwise it wouldn't be targeting. That's a total different perspective. So visually speaking, I don't think, Jim, you can help me here. I don't think there's a way that they could actually deploy troops into Iran unless we were with them.
Yeah, no, it's too far away.
Right.
I mean, look at what happened when we tried to rescue the hostages. That was too many steps involved to get that far and project force that far. But there's plenty of stuff to blow up. And remember, we don't have to actually see those underground facilities destroyed as long as you cover and blow up the entrances, and then you've got satellite coverage on it. Say, oh, they're going back and digging that one out.
That's right.
Boom. Blow it up again. If they can't resupply it, those people will run out of supplies underneath the ground there and eventually have a problem breathing. So
But
I don't think
there's
it has to be
very
destroyed right
interesting,
now.
difficult, tricky questions here, right? When Israel struck into Syria and blew up the facility there, the nascent nuclear facility there, they did that. They may have verified it on the ground, but they didn't show the evidence to the world. When they hit Iraq and Iraq in the early 80s, it was above ground. They may very well need to have assets on the ground that can verify that what they're hitting is actually hit properly. And so I wouldn't take that off the table. I agree with you, though, Sarah. We're not talking about like rolling in tanks, but certainly I don't think they would be taking anything off the table now if they want to ensure that these strikes are effective, because they're not going to have unlimited time on this. They need to make sure that they're
Just
effective.
picking up on what Jim said, Reuters now quoting Iranian sources, the Supreme Leader Khamenei is alive.
Of course he is.
He's probably somewhere it's hard to get a hold of him. But and the world would be a better place without him still breathing the same air, I think is worthwhile pointing out. But we think about the timing here. And I'm going to ask the control room, do we have the soundbite from President Trump when asked a couple of days ago of whether or not the attack on Israel was imminent or when it might be coming? All right, we have that. Here it is.
How imminent is an Israeli strike on Iran?
Well, I don't want to say imminent, but it looks like it's something that could very well happen. Look, it's very simple, not complicated. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Other than that, I want them to be successful. I want them to be tremendous. We'll help them be successful. We'll trade with them. We'll do whatever is necessary. You know, I stopped a war between India and Pakistan. And I stopped it with trade. I don't think I've ever seen a story written about it, but it was pretty cool. They were getting ready. Pakistan was their turn to hit, and eventually they're going to go nuclear. And I stopped it. I called each. I respect each leader greatly. I know them. And I spoke to them, and I talked about trade. I said,
All right, so President Trump speaking there this morning. Senator, you'd almost have to believe the United States knew the Israelis had jets fueled. That was this morning. It was less than 12 hours later, the Israeli jets were in the air.
I would say I wasn't briefed on it.
Well, what?
I would say I wasn't briefed on it.
Right, I understand that you were not, but it's hard to imagine that the United States didn't know and have a good heads up. That's a real friend running interference and, if you want to say, deception.
I know that Israel did inform us that they were going to go. The timing on that, I don't know. I mean, I was with the president when he was having this press conference. Well, it wasn't really a press conference. It's kind of a Q&A. It turned into a press conference. And we've also, heard chatter and been involved in conversations that we knew this time was coming. But I do believe that the president was hoping to try to avoid anything like this if it was possible. Iranians had
You understand why I'm asking about the timing.
Absolutely. But Iranians had the ticket to say, hey, we don't want this to happen. We want to work with you. And they chose not to. You have Israel and you have the United States both saying it's not going to happen. And there's nobody in that region, Leland, was okay with them having a nuclear weapon. There's no one in that region that wanted that to happen.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, Joel, you pointed out, and we start very small and look at the military operation, we zoom way out. We haven't heard from the Jordanians, we haven't heard from the Saudis, we haven't heard from the Emiratis or the Qataris. It has been silence.
Crickets, for a reason, because going to what the senator is pointing out and what we're talking about here, the region does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Remember back during President Biden's term when he authorized shooting down of Iranian missiles, Jordan joined in that strike. The Saudis allowed it to go forward. I think that if Israel can contain its strikes to these military targets and these nuclear targets and maintain that and not have it expand more broadly, you're going to continue to see silence.
Hey, Leland, I wasn't briefed on this either, but I will answer the question because I don't have to be proper like that. Of course we knew. We have people there. All right, they saw what was going on. But look at how President Trump played this in conjunction with Israel. He inherited this problem. All right, he went ahead. Bibi came to town and he said, we want to blow them up before they reconstitute their air defenses. President Trump said, no, I'm going to do diplomacy. I'm going to do a good faith effort. If they stop enrichment and dismantle their stuff, we'll make a deal and everything will be fine. I'm going to do my best to do that. And he did. The Ayatollahs decided they wanted a bomb more than they wanted peace. And so at some point, it became too close to the end of that. And President Trump and President Netanyahu said, time is now.
And the reporting is that the Israelis shared the intelligence about the Iranians being able to build a bomb with the United States. I want to get Lieutenant General Newton in here as well. The Israelis have incredible air defenses. They have been planning for this for years. The layer of the Aero defense system, David Sling, and then the Iron Dome to protect Israel from these kinds of attacks. They can't leave their airspace shut down for very long. We understand El Al has canceled planes. That's the only lifeline Israel has. They're shut off if El Al stops flying. Take us through militarily what Israel has to do the next 48, 72 hours to allow them to reopen their country about the size of New Jersey and not be shut down for 2 weeks of war.
Well, I've flown in and out of Israel. I certainly appreciate the position they're in. I guarantee you that Prime Minister Netanyahu is asking his Israeli military leadership the same thing. How long are we going to have to wait from 48 to 72, perhaps 96 hours? You get outside of 96 hours, though, Leland, and now it really has a broader impact on Israel. You know, its economies, its people, the morale, and so forth. And let's not forget, someone's already said this tonight, Israel's been at war extensively, you know, since October 7th. And so this is not only a military that's somewhat tired and so forth, but certainly it's a military that's, and the Israeli people also. But I believe you're right. They've got to make sure they get back to as normal operations as they possibly can, not in the next couple hours, but certainly in the coming days. And so forth. And I want to also
see what the Israelis, see what the Iranians are going to do. This now from the Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. At dawn today, the Zionist regime committed a heinous crime on our soil, exposing its wicked nature by striking residential areas. Never mind, they targeted only the floors where the generals lived. It must now await a severe punishment by God's will. The powerful hand of Iran's armed forces will not let this go unanswered. A number of our commanders and scientists were martyred in the attack. Their successors will immediately continue their mission. With this crime, the Zionist regime has sealed a bitter and painful fate for itself and surely will face it. Jim, this is a good point. Why aren't the Iranians telling the Israelis and giving them their bomb damage assessment for them?
Thanks. You know, if you want to do that, just give us a list of all your guys. I think it's a sign that they know they were hit badly. They know the Israelis are going to put that out anyhow. So it's a situation now where they have to try and reconstitute. And whoever is operating, you know, the Supreme Leader's Twitter account at this point is doing that. And if he's still alive, who cares? Because he's so far gone. The hope we might want to look at is, does this start a succession fight inside Iran? That could be another, you know, unknown situation where the people who have been fighting behind the scenes to see who takes over when he actually kicks the bucket might decide now's the time to go ahead and rise to the top.
Or the people. I mean, you think about it. A huge part of the Israeli operation, and you used to be involved in things off the books for the Department of Defense. A huge part of the Israeli operation, the Mossad operation in Iran, has got to be trying to cement and foment some kind of civil unrest in a possible revolution.
Yes and no. You would want to think that the Iranian people are going to stand up and overthrow the regime. Probably isn't going to happen. You would want, just what Jim said, the infighting to start taking place and then to start wilting from within. When you start taking out generals who guard the leaders, who
leaders get
control the
worried.
military, yes, they get very worried because now there's this ruffling for a power struggle that could take place. When that happens, whoever, just understand the region, it's they respect strength. So whoever they perceive to be the strongest, they will get behind at the time.
I want to get you on this because I think there's a lot of Americans right now who are watching with two things on their mind. One, 50,000 American troops in the Middle East, 700,000 Americans in Israel. Now, the people who lived in Israel chose to live in Israel. That's one thing. 50,000 American troops signed up to protect and would give their lives for America, not for Israel. There's a difference, I would say. And there's a lot of Americans who say, we just got out of 20 years of war. President Trump promised no more forever wars. How does this, give me a scenario where this does not become an American war?
Well, I'll let Jim talk. I'll answer this, but I'll let Jim talk from the troops' perspective and what they signed up for, and then I'll talk about the political side of it. So
it's U.S. strategic interests and the Constitution. So it doesn't matter if it might be defending an ally or doing something else. We don't want it to be on Israel's behalf, but if it's in U.S. strategic interests to go ahead and do that, then U.S. troops will do what they need to do. But I don't think that's how it plays out.
right.
The Iranians have no advantage to be gained by pulling us into this. Hitting U.S. troops would be the dumbest thing they could do right now. Because right now,
well, they did allow October 7th, which, I mean, if you want to think about where we've come in less than 2 years, the Iranians launched October 7th, allowed Hamas to launch October 7th, and it has brought about the destruction of Hamas and Hezbollah with their insurance policies against what happened today.
Right.
And
let's not talk about let's not forget about the Houthis too.
Right. But I want to get back to this idea of Americans who are sitting here worried this is another forever war in the Middle East.
So I will tell you, I'll go to President Trump's personality. He's not one to stay in. He's there to take out a target. I think a lot of people can argue that after Osama bin Laden was taken out, should we have stayed in Afghanistan? Yet we stood. When President Trump was there, he had a strategic plan, not a disastrous plan. He had a strategic plan on how to get us out of Afghanistan. If we were to be forced into a war, and we are not wanting that, and I want everybody to understand that, we do not want a war with anybody in the region, anybody at all. But if we were to be forced into the war, it would be a shock and awe moment. President Trump would throw everything at them. We would have a clear and precise victory moment, understanding, knowing what victory looked like. When you start a war, define what victory looks like. If we can define it before we start it, we will win it, we'll get in, and we'll get out.
All right. Lieutenant General Newton, what percentage of Israel's firepower has been used overnight?
I would say close to 50 to 70% of their air power has been used in a variety of capabilities. Certainly their strike aircraft, the F-35s. Leland, you also mentioned the F-15s. Other aspects of their Air Force, and certainly their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They're back at their bases. My sources tell me that all jets return safe and sound, but they're going to be ready to be armed and used again, I believe, over and over. So a significant portion. But again, we go back to October 26th. This playbook that we're seeing tonight played out. Go back to October 26th, and you're seeing the same type of capability. But what we're going to see what's different than October 26th is just like Prime Minister Netanyahu said. We are now at war with Iran, and we will continue to strike.
Days and days.
We've got plenty of air capability to do so, Leland.
I think you have to think, as we watch this, Glenn, that this operation, this war, we think about the great military operations that have been launched with surprise, with intelligence services, with sabotage, with deception, and then with just sort of an overwhelmingly successful moment. You think about the bin Laden raid, but then you go back to something like D-Day. I mean, I don't think as we're watching this, because we sort of have this micro view of a couple of pictures of Tel Aviv and then a few burning buildings in Tehran, I don't think we're really appreciating right now the incredibleness of what we're witnessing.
Yeah, the planning that goes into these operations have been in place for a long time, and then we update them based on intelligence or events that are unfolding. So, when the Israelis do this, they're not just looking at that one effect of hitting a particular target. Everything they've been talking about, how much have we disrupted the government? How much have we destabilized the government? And what is this going to take, not just for this year, but for many years? all that is really in play in this entire plan.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really wanted to touch on was we were talking a little bit about the missile defense. I think that when you're talking about U.S. troops and what IDF is or the Israelis going to be doing, it's definitely in a defensive nature. As the senator was saying, if a missile is launched from Iran heading towards Israel that's flying all over our troops, we don't know that it's actually targeting our troops until it's passed. So we're going to have to intercept those things. So I think there's a defensive nature. The same thing is every system has a percentage of failure. So if you see a large volley like the volley from Iran, the possibility of those missiles or sun just getting through are very prominent. It's valid.
Yeah, the Israelis
so that's
saying,
why I can understand them beyond that place.
Yeah, the Israelis saying there now will be casualties on their side. Live pictures of Jerusalem, where so far the country of Israel has effectively shut down for today, preparing for the Iranian counterattack. The New York Times, 2 Iranian officials say a third wave of attacks have started, targeting radars and air defense across the country, nuclear weapons facilities, enrichment facilities, 2 missile bases, an air base. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard chief, their top general has been killed, the chief of staff of the armed forces, and at least 2 nuclear scientists. In one of the more stunning and daring opening salvos of a war in the Middle East. Now we await the Iranian response, both as they've promised to hit Israel, also promised to hit American bases in the Middle East, not to mention the effects here at home. We get to that next. Oil, meaning the price of gas, is now already up 10%. Because of the potential war that will happen in the Persian Gulf. We have been waiting, talking about this day for 20 years. It is upon us. Continuing coverage in just a minute. Israel has launched a major long-range strike against Iran and promises a days, if not weeks-long campaign to take out not only the Iranian military, but more importantly, its nuclear facilities. The reaction in the United States has been incredible. You have promises by Republicans and also by the administration of a massive attack on Iran if Iran follows through on its promises to strike the United States. Republicans in Congress have lined up squarely behind Israel. Democrats appear a little bit more split on the issue. Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, I will not say former Marine, I will say served as a Marine.
Marine veteran.
Marine veteran in Iraq, and joins us now from back home in Massachusetts. There seems to be a split about Israel's attack and the fact that it seems to have had at least tacit approval by President Trump and the U.S. administration. Which side of this in the Democratic Party do you come down on?
Well, actually, I think the question is, where is the administration? Because Rubio's statement doesn't offer any support for Israel whatsoever. In fact, it pleads with Iran not to attack U.S. Troops, U.S. facilities. It says we had nothing to do with this. And we know that Trump has been arguing with Netanyahu over the last few days, trying to pursue the route of diplomacy. So I think it was a quite striking omission from Rubio's statement that he said nothing in support of Netanyahu's actions tonight.
So you're reading this as the Trump administration is not being supportive enough of Israel, so you would say we should be more? Does that mean what? That the United States should say we declare a war on Iran too?
No, you're reading too much into what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I don't think that the support is there from the administration, because I think there's an awful lot of uncertainty here. And Trump seemed to see a path forward with diplomacy, and that's why he was arguing with Netanyahu not to conduct these strikes. It's way too early to tell how effective these strikes will be, both militarily and beyond. But there are a lot of questions. For example, Netanyahu wants regime change in Iran. A lot of people want regime change in Iran because, in fact, a lot of Iranian people want regime change in Iran. There's an amazing amount of pro-American sentiment in Iran. But it's not clear that these military strikes will support that. In fact, a lot of analysts think that military strikes will empower the hardliners, make it more difficult to achieve regime change, or maybe get regime change in the wrong direction, getting someone who's more militant towards Israel in the West because of these attacks. So there are a lot of questions about where this goes long term. Yeah. Another really important one, Leland, how long does it take Iran to reconstitute? I asked our CENTCOM commander that question 2 days ago in a classified setting. I said, if Israel or the United States takes military action against Iran, how long will it take them to rebuild their nuclear program? Now, it was a classified briefing, so I can't tell you the answer, but I would say that I'm concerned.
Fair enough. I've heard that before, and I've heard the public argument that regime change in Iran is going to happen through diplomacy or whatever. That said, we've heard that and tried diplomacy with the Iranians for a long time. It hasn't worked. I hear what you're saying also about President Trump, that he seemed to be taking more of a diplomatic tact. I now am wondering if this wasn't a game of good cop, bad cop, and 60 days after President Trump said, you have 60 days, Ayatollah, the 60 days expired, and then the bad cop was allowed to take over. The fact that the Israelis said that they had evidence that the Iranians were days away from a nuclear bomb. But I'm trying to figure this out. I don't think anybody, at least I haven't, and I studied this for 15 years, expected this level of an Israeli attack and a sustained campaign. I see this, maybe you see it differently, as the beginning of Israel dismantling Iran and taking it apart from the top down.
That could very well be the case. And
Would
you're
you
right
support
that?
that?
Too early to. No, I mean, you're right that could very well be the case, and it's too early to tell. It also could be that there really wasn't a good cop, bad cop going on, but that's what it turns into. That by the morning, the administration just decides Israel is so far in that rather than not offer any support like Rubio did tonight, the administration decides they've got to get behind Israel because then they look like they're out to lunch. I'm not sure, but there's an awful lot of uncertainty tonight about where this goes. But
we've had Senator, hold on, I just want to get you on the record on this. We've had Senator Cruz on, Senator Mullen, both very close to the White House. And to a point, from Marco Rubio himself, let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. Both Mullen and Cruz went farther and said, if one hair is touched on the head of one American soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine of the 50,000 in theater, that the response by the United States on Iran would be devastating. Do you agree that that should be the U.S. policy?
That certainly should be U.S. policy, but there are bigger strategic issues at stake here, Leland. Let's not forget that we all agree the biggest national security threat in the world to the United States is China. And if China starts a war over Taiwan, we could be in World War III. We've got two big problems here. One is we can't use all of our missiles in the Middle East, getting in a war there that we need to deter a conflict in the Pacific. The second is that if there's one thing in the world that makes it more likely for China to start that war, it's seeing the United States bogged down in another war in the Middle East. So while I agree with the principle, we're going to respond harshly to any American service member or just civilian, even a State Department employee that gets nicked in Baghdad. We should respond fiercely. We've got to remember the bigger strategic picture here, and this is exactly why we don't want to get into a broader war in the Middle East. And look, for all my disagreements with President Trump, we agree on that. We don't want a big war in the Middle East.
I'm thoughtful about this and hear what you say. The Israelis are putting out that they did not have a choice here. The IDF now just put out more on what was a leak a couple of hours ago, saying that the Israelis had determined that Iran was within days of being able to build a nuclear weapon. The IDF is revealing for the first time the Iranian regime is advancing a secret set of plans for the technological advancement of all parts of development for a nuclear weapon. In the framework of this plan, senior nuclear scientists in Iran have been working to secretly develop all components. In the recent months, it's been accelerated. I'm reading this from the Israelis right now. They have some videos and everything else attached. We're going to try to get those on the screen as soon as we can. But I just wanted, there's a thought here that this makes the world a lot safer because the Israelis will have dismantled much of the Iranian military. They will have dismantled much of their nuclear program. They will have denied China, that you point out is a huge risk and threat to the United States, a good friend and fellow troublemaker in the world. And that when you deal with the Iranians and the world sees that America and its allies, of which Israel is one of our strongest, take aggressive action, that makes the world a safer place, does it not?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. China does not need Iran. So I think that the strategic risk here that the United States gets bogged down in a war in the Middle East that imperils our ability to deter conflict in Asia, where we have our greatest national security threat, doesn't go away. But look, Leland, some of those things could come true. I mean, Israel has been way more successful at dismantling Hezbollah than I think anybody imagined a few months ago. But let's also be clear that they're apparently taking this action because Iran was within days of building a nuclear weapon. Now, we have not seen that evidence, or at least I on the Armed Services Committee have not seen that evidence, and we just had a briefing with the CENTCOM commander. But let's be clear that under the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, as imperfect as it was, Iran was kept a year away from this. So actually, diplomacy had worked. Diplomacy had kept Iran way farther away from getting a nuclear weapon than they are today. And actually, I think that if we had kept that deal in place, we would have built upon it, and they would be even further away from a nuclear weapon. So you can't throw that out the window. Trump was trying to recreate exactly what he threw out.
Well, and now the Iranians don't have much to recreate. The Israelis have taken care of it. But I want to just get you on this real quick. I know you have to go.
But you just wait, Leland. Hey, wait a minute. Don't forget this question of reconstitution. Look,
no, I hear you, but we don't know that. Let me just get you. Let me get you on the right.
But it matters
here and
where
now.
they are 3 years from now, not just where they are today.
Let me get you on the here and now real quick. The Ayatollah, in his statement that just came out, did not declare war on Israel and did not mention the United States. What do you make of that? Does that say the Iranians have received from the United States a message, not tonight, not ever?
Look, I think that's a very good sign, but it's just a sign.
Okay.
It's way too early, and Netanyahu says this is going to be a multi-day, maybe even multi-week campaign. There's a long road ahead that's perilous both for the United States and Israel, but also, of course, for Iran. So too early to tell where this is headed. But there's a lot of danger in Netanyahu's action tonight, and therefore the United States has to be very calibrated about our own national security interests going forward.
Fair enough. Good to see you, Congressman, as always. Thanks for being up late. I know you got an early morning as well. It's good to see you, sir.
No problem. Good to see you, too.
General Peter Zwack, retired Brigadier General, former U.S. Defense Attaché to Russia, is with us. Jonathan Gilliam, former U.S. Navy SEAL, with us as well. Jim Hansen, Chief Editor of the Middle East Forum, former Army Special Forces, and Joel Rubin, who I assure everyone is very important and thoughtful, used to work in the Obama administration at the State Department, is with us as well. Joel, the Obama administration was in love with the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, on and on. Trump tore it up, threw it away, because it was a crummy deal. We can all agree on that. To me, the Israelis have totally reset the Middle East as of today, and the Iranians have now been taught a lesson by Israel that I think they didn't think was possible.
Well, first of all, I'm going to digress a bit, and I think what the congressman was getting at is there's a little bit of karma here, and that when you rip up that deal and don't replace it with anything, this is where we are. We ended up in this position because there were no guardrails on the nuclear program. But yes, to your point, if reports are accurate and what we're seeing right now is taking place, the Israelis have clearly set back that program, and that's the big question, though. The estimates about Israeli strikes were perhaps it set it back 1 to 2 years in public estimates. If America joins in, several years. So it's a bit all over the map. I do think that it's going to really matter.
I'm just going to put this out there, Jim, and I don't think anybody imagined the Israelis doing what they've done. This was going to be, a couple bunker busters at Natanz, maybe taking out the heavy water reactor, maybe if the Israelis could do it. This seems to be a whole different level of that was tactical. This is a strategic.
Yeah, and I want to add to this. So I think this is the point. It's like there are always assessments and guesses and think tank pieces that tell you exactly how the world's going to unfold, and then they're completely wrong when we actually see it in reality. That happened on Hezbollah.
Well, look, we were told that taking out Soleimani was going to be World War III. It turned out that it put the Iranians on their heels. Same with taking out Hezbollah. Jonathan Gilliam, former U.S. Navy SEAL, with us. Jonathan, I am just shocked, and I'm hoping you can educate our audience a little bit on the kind of intelligence it takes for the Israelis to know where the Iranian chief of staff of their military, where the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, where the nuclear scientists are sleeping, and then what it does to the surviving parts of the Iranian military that they know the Israelis had that kind of intelligence?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Leland. This is an incredible evening. And I think that Israel showed that they were capable of doing something very similar with the pager attack that they carried out recently, and that their intelligence goes far beyond what we've seen before. They know what not only Iran's proxies are doing, but they know what Iran is doing as well. And I think this is a huge leap forward, just like we saw in the Ukraine and Russia and that war with drones and how that has evolved. We have also seen an evolution in Iran's ability to use social media, for instance, same thing with China, in affecting different nations and what's going on the ground there. But what we've seen with Israel when it comes to their enemy, they have systematically targeted Hamas. They've systematically targeted Hezbollah, the Houthis in a roundabout way where we were involved in that. But what they've done tonight with Israel has shown that, with Iran, has shown that Israel is on top of their game when it comes to intelligence, and it is remarkable.
General Zwack, as we look at the world right now, with the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard dead, the head of Iran's military dead, two top nuclear scientists dead, much of Iran's air defenses decimated, unquestionably their nuclear program set way back, if not destroyed, and a potential of a continuation of the Israeli attacks. As the sun comes up in the Middle East, yes, there's going to be counterattacks. Yes, U.S. troops are in harm's way. Yes, 700,000 Americans in Israel are targeted. I can't help but think that the world's a safer place.
Man. You guys take care. Give me a call if you need anything else, right?
Yes, I think that Iran has been a threat, an irritant to basically all the countries in the region, one way or the other. And their proxies have been pretty well beaten up by Israel. But this, I think, getting at an earlier point, imagine the Ayatollah right now.
He doesn't trust anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And the Revolutionary Guard General, Hussein Salami, remember that happened to him before when we took out Qasem Soleimani in 2020. And so there's got to be a siege mentality a little bit, and getting at the point of Israeli intelligence. I think that, and this is what worries Russia a little bit in regard to Ukraine, they're penetrated. You have a lot of, I think, what you would call Iranian patriots that very carefully, very dangerously are providing human and other things to the Israelis that enable them to get by the name and, targeting
where they're sleeping. Stand by, General. Just now, another statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is the sun is coming up in Tel Aviv. Israel is shut down right now. The entire country, about the size of New Jersey, 7 million people, 700,000 of whom are American citizens, will spend the day in their bomb shelters. The Iranians have promised a counterattack, not only on Israel, but on American military assets. The Israelis have said this will go on for days. Their salvos of attacks into Iran. Netanyahu, this is in Hebrew. We are coming off a very successful opening move, and with God's help, we are going to achieve a great many accomplishments. Jim, I don't think anybody, at least I didn't, imagine an Israeli strike on Iran would have anywhere close to this magnitude of effect, and that Israel would then say, and we're not done, we are continuing.
Yeah, and I thought if it was going to be that big a strike, we'd have to help. Tankers, stealth bombers, all the big things that we have that they don't. They did it with the shoestring collection of tools that they have. Now, a lot of people are saying, okay, we did this, and you made a great point. The world is a safer place. Short-term, danger, asymmetric problems, things are going to be bad. But overall, Iran has had their nuclear program wiped out to some extent. And people are saying they'll reconstitute it. Well, are we just going to sit on the sidelines?
So, yeah,
the
Israelis should not bomb because of the fear that they may reconstitute it later? I don't...
No, they're going to, and if they start reconstituting it, their human will tell them, and they'll bomb it again, or will bomb it again. So the idea that they'll somehow in a vacuum be able, oh, well, the Iranians will just rebuild this stuff. No, they won't. No, we're not going to let them. The Israelis won't let them.
I have to say, Joel, I am sort of chuckling at both members of the, especially sort of the MAGA right. I'm thinking the Steve Bannons and others saying, you know, we don't want a war with Iran, but especially the left and the Jewish left that went after Trump and said, you know, this is silly and Trump's going to give all this stuff up and on and on. That the remaking of the Middle East that we have seen by Benjamin Netanyahu define Joe Biden, and now what I have to think is playing a game of good cop, bad cop with Donald Trump on attacking Iran, is a pretty remarkable change of events.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that he exactly defied Joe Biden. I think that President Biden was incredibly supportive of Israel's security, including twice defending Israel when Iran responded with missile attacks. Let's see how President Trump responds on that. But to your bigger point, yeah, look, I think there are a lot of assumptions, certainly in the political environment, about how it's going to unfold, that we all know exactly what will occur if Israel bombs Iran. It means that there will be another Iraq war, right? I mean, that's the mindset. I have worked in
the idea of this
politics.
If Israel bombs Iran,
then
there's a forever war.
A forever war. Yeah. And, you know, I think to Israel's credit tonight, the decision to go in hard and heavy and aggressive and message that this is going to be a persistent attack may paradoxically reduce the likelihood of that outcome, because hitting hard now, while Iran is in disarray, while its leadership has been incapacitated, while it does not know who is talking to who, is the best way to cauterize the potential for Iran to then come forward more aggressively. Going slow, pinpricks, that could potentially create a bigger conflagration.
For people just tuning in, want to just sort of reset here in terms of what's going on. Sun's coming up in the Middle East. Israel launched a surprise attack. So surprised, in fact, that President Trump said today that he didn't think that attack was imminent. And Israel launched a massive multi-wave strike on Iran, taking out 2 of Iran's top generals, including the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and also the Iranian military chief of staff, the equivalent of our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Israelis took out much of Iran's, if not all of Iran's, air defense systems and now appear to have air superiority over Iran. And they have begun dismantling with bunker buster bombs Iran's nuclear facilities, not just one, the facility at Natanz, but multiple of them. Live pictures of Tel Aviv, Israel. The Iranians have promised a response. They've not declared war on Iran, but they have said they will respond and attack Israel. Now, they've tried to do that twice before. Didn't work out for them so well because of an enormous effort by the United States, other Arab countries to protect Israel from Iran's drones and ballistic missiles. But this country of Israel is pretty much shut down today as they wait for this coming attack. 700,000 Americans now in the bullseye, quite literally, in Israel, and then about 50,000 American troops. The Iranians had said that if Israel attacks Iran, Iran would attack U.S. bases. Now we wait and see, quite literally, if Iran has the capability and the wherewithal to start a war with the United States. We'll be right back. Welcome back. They are burning the midnight oil at the White House right now and watching what is happening in Tel Aviv, Israel. The sun has just come up after a surprise overnight attack by the Israelis on Iran. They say that the attack was just the opening salvo in a up to 2-week campaign to dismantle the Iranian military and the Iranian nuclear program. The Israelis have already taken out much of the Iranian top military leadership, their air defenses, and are now starting to go after Iran's nuclear facilities. Jim Hansen, Joel Rubin. Jim, first to you. yes or no, do we see the Iranians respond and try to hit Israel or U.S. bases?
They will try to hit Israel with whatever they've got left, and they're not dumb enough, I don't believe, they sometimes prove me wrong, to attack the U.S. right now and make it worse for them.
Joel, Ben Gurion Airport shut down. How long do the Israelis have to do this, just in terms of keeping their country operational?
Keeping people locked down. It is the Shabbat coming up, so this is sort of a the Jewish Sabbath.
It will be
This is sort of
shutting
a
down on
normal
Friday anyway.
shutdown. So they probably got a few days over the weekend, and then they're going to have to reassess if they can open back up.
All right. We may hear from President Trump as early as tomorrow. We're told he has a meeting in the Situation Room tomorrow at 11 a.m. The date here is important. Mark this down. On April 12th, Donald Trump told the Iranians that they had 60 days to make a deal about their nuclear program. It is June 12th right now. The Israelis presented evidence that the Iranians were within days of a nuclear bomb, and then they took action that no one thought the Israelis capable of, and they have proved us wrong once again. Marky Martin starts at 6 a.m.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.